All right, everyone. Get ready to dive into something pretty interesting with us today. We're talking risk versus reward, and more specifically, why playing it safe might actually be the riskier move.
That's right. We're cracking open Unit 12, which looks at this whole idea of risk and reward, especially in a business context.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I first saw this on our topics, I wasn't sure what to expect, but after looking through it, I'm actually really curious about this.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Right off the bat, Unit 12 highlights this tension all of us feel as humans.
Hmm.
We want security naturally,
Right.
but then real growth often means we have to embrace some level of uncertainty.
It's like this constant back and forth. It reminds me of that saying, the biggest risk is not taking any risks. But honestly, seeing it laid out in this business context like it is in this Unit 12 just hits way differently. It's not just about whether I decide to finally try that new Thai place down the street.
That's a great point, and that's where Unit 12 takes us even further. It argues that always choosing that so-called safe path can actually be its own risk, calling it the paradox of playing it safe.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this paradox idea.
Well, it really comes down to missed opportunities.
Yeah.
Every time we choose what's familiar over something unknown, we could be missing out on experiences, connections, anything really that might lead to more personal or professional fulfillment. It's like, what could we be saying no to?
It's like saying no to a free lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Even if the odds are like, 1 in a billion, there's always that tiny chance you could miss out on a life-changing win. Or even just a free coffee.
Exactly. And to bring it back to the business world, the source material actually uses the example of those big, well-known businesses that failed because they just didn't adapt to change.
Oh, interesting.
They stuck with what they knew, what felt safe, and in the end, they lost out to competitors who were willing to innovate and take risks. They were overtaken.
It makes you wonder, if they had just tried something new, where would they be now?
Right.
Speaking of risk takers, I noticed the source material mentioned Jim Rohn as an example of someone who really embraced risk on his way to success.
He definitely did.
But it got me thinking, what about some examples of entrepreneurs who really get this idea of calculated risk taking, where it really paid off in a big way?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned calculated risk, because that's something Unit 12 gets into as well.
Mhm.
And since we're talking big calculated risks, it's a perfect time to bring up someone like Elon Musk and, let's say, Tesla.
Okay, yeah.
Remember when electric cars were just this kind of far-off idea?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like something out of a movie?
Exactly. People thought it was crazy to try to make them mainstream. But Musk took a chance, poured tons of money into Tesla, even with all the production problems, and faced skepticism from everyone.
It seemed like a huge gamble at the time.
Huge. But it was a calculated risk, right? He analyzed everything, invested a lot in research and development, put together a really strong team, and in the end, look what happened. He revolutionized an entire industry.
It's like he looked at all the reasons why it wouldn't work, all the what-ifs that everyone else was hung up on, and found ways to work around them. He mitigated the risk.
Absolutely.
Because that's a big part of what Unit 12 talks about, right? Not just jumping into the unknown without a plan, but actually assessing those potential downsides.
You got it. The source material really stresses the importance of what it calls mitigation strategies, even giving a really clear example. Let's say you're thinking about starting a business.
Okay, I'm listening.
A calculated risk approach to that would be to make a really detailed business plan, get enough funding secured, research your competition, basically do your homework before jumping in head first.
It's like you're still going for your dream, but you've got a backup plan for your backup plan.
Exactly. You're acknowledging the potential problems, but you're prepared for them. And that actually leads us to another key point from Unit 12. It's called the startup dilemma.
Startup dilemma. Is that what we were just talking about with like high risk, high reward, but also a high chance of, completely failing?
Yeah, that's it. Unit 12 lays out these two, almost opposite ways of looking at startups. So on the one hand, they have this massive potential for growth, for doing something totally new. But on the other hand, yeah, they fail a lot.
So how do you find that in between, that balance between going for it but not being reckless, especially because Unit 12 said that something like 84% of business owners think of themselves as risk takers.
That's right. They did use that statistic. And it's really interesting because while there's no magic formula, that does seem to suggest something, right? Like there's a link between being willing to embrace risk and actually finding success as an entrepreneur. It goes back to what we were saying about calculated risks.
Right, right.
Understanding the risks,
Yeah.
figuring out how to make them less scary, and then being ready to change course if you need to.
Okay, that makes sense. And it's interesting because Unit 12 doesn't just talk about risk in terms of money,
Yeah.
They bring up personal satisfaction, and even the idea of regrets later in life, it's like the bigger picture stuff comes into play too.
Totally. Unit 12 is really saying that risk is just part of life, you know? Relationships, personal growth, our careers, even creative stuff, it's all affected by how we deal with risk. Just think about it.
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean.
If you want to really connect with someone, that takes making yourself vulnerable, right? And there's always a risk of getting hurt, or deciding to learn something new, or finally start that creative project you've been putting off. That all means getting out of your comfort zone, and there's always a chance you could fail.
That is so true, and it's funny because sometimes the scariest thing is actually not giving ourselves permission to try.
Mhm.
You know, like we're so afraid of failing or just being uncomfortable that we don't even go for the things we really want.
It's easy to get stuck there. And that's where those statistics from Section I of Unit 12 really get interesting, I think, because they really challenge the way we usually think about risk.
Okay, yeah, this is what I was looking forward to. The outline mentioned some really compelling stats, so lay it on me. What kind of eye openers did you find?
Well, one study they talked about found that while a single calculated risk by itself might only have like a 55% chance of working out,
Okay.
taking multiple calculated risks consistently actually increases your overall chances of success, like significantly.
Wait, so you're saying that even if each individual risk has slightly higher odds of failing, if you spread your bets over time, it actually works out in your favor? That's kind of mind-blowing. Okay, give me another one.
All right, so this one's from Harvard Business School, which is pretty cool. Unit 12 cites their research that actually found that moderate risk takers, so not the people who are totally reckless, but also not the people who are terrified to do anything, had the lowest failure rates when it came to starting businesses.
So it's about finding that sweet spot again. It's not about being fearless, it's about being strategic about it.
Okay, you got to have one more. What's the big one?
This last one is, I don't know, maybe not as uplifting, but it's important if we're going to really understand risk. The National Institutes of Health found that a really significant number of deaths among young people are because of accidents and injuries that, generally speaking, could have been prevented, like they were linked to risky behavior.
Whoa, that's a heavy one, but it's a good reminder that risk is a part of life. But knowing how to deal with it, especially when it comes to things like health and safety, is crucial.
Exactly. And it brings us back to the main idea of Unit 12, which is that we shouldn't be afraid of risk. We should try to understand it, think it through, and approach it strategically. So we've got the stats, we've talked about calculated risks, and we even touched on how this isn't just about money. It seems like there's a real shift that needs to happen in how we see risk, wouldn't you say?
It really is. It's almost like how we view risk is really how we define success.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, are we aiming for a life where everything is predictable?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we okay with a little or a lot of uncertainty if it means we could grow more or actually find things more fulfilling?
And those things that are fulfilling might be totally different than we expect. I mean, even Unit 12 talks about how a career in academia, which a lot of people see as this safe choice,
Right.
actually needs a certain amount of risk-taking too. I mean, years of research, maybe it doesn't work out, trying to get published, dealing with competition. It's not all like peace and quiet in those ivory towers.
It's a great example, yeah. Risk can look really different depending on what you're talking about. And it actually highlights something important that Unit 12 points out, which is that there are times when playing it safe really is the smartest way to reach a goal.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying that there is a time and place for caution, that not every goal means you have to just like jump into the void.
Exactly. Think about it. Let's say you've got a health issue going on,
Yeah.
something serious. Playing it safe by doing what your doctor says, focusing on getting better.
Yeah.
That's probably the best way to reach your goal of getting healthy again. Right.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not about always choosing risk. It's about knowing what you want, looking at what could happen, good and bad, and then picking the path that fits your values and what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes that means being bold, and sometimes it means being a little more cautious.
Right. And Unit 12 actually leaves us with this really thought-provoking quote from Daniel Kahneman.
Okay, let's hear it.
It says, "Optimistic people play a disproportionate role in shaping our lives. They got to where they are by seeking challenges and taking risks."
Wow. So the people who really make a difference are often the ones who are willing to get out of their comfort zones to really go for it. This deep dive has been amazing. I mean, we talked about how playing it safe isn't always what it seems. We dug into calculated risks, and we even talked about how being cautious can be the right move sometimes.
It all goes back to really understanding our own relationship with risk. It's not the enemy, really. It can be a tool something that helps us grow, and ultimately a way to live a more fulfilling life, however we want to define that.
I love that. So if our listeners take away one thing from this whole deep dive, I hope it's this. Risk, when we approach it thoughtfully, might be the key to a more fulfilling, more successful life. Thanks for joining us.